Seraphine had a rule about strays. Not the animals, the people. People who showed up at your door looking half destroyed, she had learned, had a way of walking back out with pieces of you stuffed in their pockets. Animals were different. Animals were honest about what they were. A dog was a dog, a cat was a cat. Neither of them would borrow your emotional bandwidth and then disappear, owing you 18 months of explanations. So when she found the cat at the servants' gate on a Tuesday morning in the worst part of November, crouched in the mud like it had decided the mud was fine, actually, the mud was acceptable, the mud was not the problem, she stood there for a full minute, just looking at it. It looked back. Most animals blinked when you stared at them. They looked away. They did the submissive eyebrow thing or the threat assessment thing, or just got bored and sniffed something else. This cat did not blink. It sat in the mud, in the freezing rain, and looked at her the way a professor looks at a student who has just said something incorrect in front of the whole class. Patient, certain of its own position, waiting for her to catch up. She brought it inside. She told herself it was because the rain was getting worse. She told herself it was a practical decision. She told herself a lot of things while she was toweling it off in the kitchen, and the cat was tolerating her hands with the specific rigid politeness of someone doing you a favor by not leaving. She named it Ash. She did not consult King Calum about this. Calum, she had been in his citadel for 43 days at that point, and she still was not sure what to do with him. That is the wrong way to say it. She knew exactly what to do with him. The mate bond made that abundantly, inconveniently clear every time he walked into a room. The problem was not knowing what to do. The problem was that she was not the kind of woman who did things because her biology told her to. She had met him for the first time at the Northern Accord, one of those political gatherings where every pack leader in the territory shook hands and smiled and tried very hard not to look like they were measuring each other for a coffin. She had been there representing her pack's trading interests. He had been there representing the fact that he owned approximately half the northern continent and answered to no one. She remembered thinking, well, that is unfortunate. Because the mate bond had clicked into place the moment their hands touched at the formal greeting line, quiet and absolute, the way a door locks when it closes. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. She had shaken his hand, smiled like a reasonable person, and spent the next 3 hours drinking water and pretending she was fine. He had, she later found out, done the same thing. Neither of them mentioned it at the Accord. That was the thing about Calum. He would not push. He would not pressure, would not corner, would not do any of the things she had been braced for. He had simply sent a letter to her pack's council the following week, formal and courteous, requesting extended diplomatic residency for her at the Citadel so that they might, and here she could practically see him choosing each word with a pair of tongs, become better acquainted. Her Alpha Council had practically shoved her out the door, so she was here, 43 days, and Calum was the kind of man who handed you a cup of tea in the morning without being asked, and then stood 12 inches too far away, like he was afraid of what he'd do if he stood any closer. Which was its own kind of problem, because she was starting to wish he would just stand closer. And she was not the kind of woman who wished for things. She was also not the kind of woman who named stray cats after geological formations and let them sleep at the foot of her bed. And yet, Ash settled into the Citadel like he had lived there before, and was simply reclaiming his territory. This was the first thing that was strange about him. Most cats, she had had cats before, growing up, needed a week at minimum to come out from under the furniture. They hid. They observed from the ceiling of whatever closet they had claimed as their emotional support location. They were, in the truest sense, cats. Ash walked through the entire first floor of the Citadel on his first day, room by room, with the systematic energy of a building inspector. He looked at the war room, he looked at the kitchens, he looked at the East Library, which was bigger than most packs' entire communal spaces, and sat in the doorway for a full 2 minutes before apparently deciding it was acceptable. He did not hide from the wolves. Calum's Citadel was full of wolves. Pack members, soldiers, advisors, kitchen staff who moonlighted as scouts. The whole building breathed wolf. from the bone-deep scent in the walls to the easy predatory way everyone moved in the corridors, like they all had private agreements with gravity. Every small animal that had ever been brought into the citadel, and Seraphine had heard the stories, lasted approximately 4 days before having to be relocated for its own well-being. Ash looked at the wolves the way a career diplomat looks at a rowdy dinner table, faintly tired. Not afraid, the soldiers started giving him a wide berth within the first week. She noticed, but could not explain it. One of the kitchen girls told her, whispering, that the cat had stared down Lieutenant Devran's wolf form in the lower corridor, and Devran's wolf had looked away first. Seraphine had said, "That's interesting," in the carefully neutral voice she used when something was very strange and she needed time to think about it. The second thing that was strange, Ash positioned himself in rooms like a strategist, not on the furniture, not in the sunny spots on the floor, which were plentiful and warm and everything a cat should want. He sat in doorways, in corners with sightlines to the exit, at the top of staircases where he could see both directions without being seen from either. She watched him do this for 2 weeks before she admitted to herself that she was watching him do this. The third thing, the war councils. Calum held them 3 times a week in the study. Senior pack leaders, his general, 3 advisors whose collective age added up to something geological. The door was always pulled to. Serious business, pack politics, border negotiations, resource agreements. Ash sat outside the cracked study door every single time and watched through the gap, not with the vague attention of an animal noticing warmth and sound, with the specific, focused attention of a participant. She found him there on a Wednesday, 3rd week, and stood in the corridor looking at him. He looked at her. She said, very quietly, "What do you know?" He looked back at the door. What she did not tell anyone, and would not tell anyone for some time, the staircase. The east staircase, which was tucked and narrow and almost never used because the west staircase was wider and better lit and right next to the kitchen, which was where everyone wanted to be anyway. She used the east staircase when she needed to be alone. It was a Tuesday, 3rd week, somewhere between midnight and the time that stopped being midnight and started being morning. She sat on the 9th step from the bottom. She had counted, the way you count things when your brain needs something small and concrete to hold on to. And she was crying. Not the dramatic kind, the kind that happens when nothing in particular has gone wrong and everything in general has gone wrong and you cannot explain it to anyone because there is nothing specific enough to point at. You are in a beautiful citadel. You are safe. You have resources and status and a mate who is doing everything right. Your life is, on paper, going correctly. And there is still this. Ash came around the corner at the bottom of the stairs. She did not know where he had come from. He stopped when he saw her, looked at her with those gold eyes in the low light. She waited for him to come up and butt his head against her hand the way cats did when they wanted something, which was the only reason cats ever came near crying humans as far as she was concerned. He walked up to the 9th step. He sat down beside her shin. He put the full weight of himself, and he was large, genuinely large, not something she thought about usually, but sitting on a staircase in the dark, you noticed, against her leg, and he stayed there, did not purr particularly, did not perform comfort, did not do the cat thing of demanding to be petted now that he had made the generous offer of his presence. Just stayed, solid, the way a wall stays. She counted to 11 minutes before he moved. She counted because she needed it to be real. She needed the number. She needed to believe that 11 minutes was not an accident, was not coincidence, was not a cat being a cat. 11 minutes is a choice. She did not tell anyone about the staircase. Not then, not for a long time. Around week 4 she started noticing that Calum watched Ash. Not the way you watch a cat because cats are entertaining. The way you watch something you are trying to categorize. Something that is not fitting into your existing frameworks. She caught him at it twice, standing in the doorway of the East Library while Ash sat on her desk ignoring her paperwork. The second time, Calum's expression was the one she had started privately calling his assessment face. The expression he made when he was thinking hard about something and did not want anyone to know he was thinking hard about something. She said, "He's just a cat." Calum said, which was not agreement. She had learned, in 43 days, that Calum communicated an enormous amount through specific varieties of silence. As agreement sounded like the end of a sentence. As non-agreement sounded like the beginning of a thought he was keeping to himself. She had gotten good at the difference. This was the second kind. Ash from the desk watched Calum with those gold eyes until Calum left the room. Then Ash looked at her. She looked back. "Don't," she said. He looked away, entirely comfortable. The full moon was in the second week of December. She did not think about what it meant. She had been in wolf packs her whole life, had grown up with the rhythm of it, the way the moon tugged at people like a tide, the way even the wolves who were good at control got a little raw around the edges the 3 days surrounding the full. It was just part of the calendar. She had learned not to be startled by it. What she had not learned to account for was a cat that was not a cat. She found out at 2 in the morning on the night of the full moon, when she went to the East Library for a book she had left on the window seat. She was not sleeping. The moon always made her restless, even though she was not wolf-blooded, some empathic leftover from years of living inside pack rhythms, and opened the door and stopped. There was a man on the floor of her library, not a small thing to encounter at 2 in the morning. He was on his knees, one hand braced against the rug, the other arm wrapped around his own ribs, like he was holding himself together through pure stubbornness. His hair was charcoal gray, which was a notable thing, not old man gray, but the kind of gray that sat in certain people like a genetic declaration. He was bleeding, a wound on his side, bandaged badly or not bandaged at all, she could not tell in the low light. He looked up at her. Gold eyes. She held the door handle for a long moment. She had been raised in the North. She knew the names. She had known them since she was old enough to understand what border wars were, and why the adults got quiet, certain kinds of quiet, when they talked about them. She knew the name Zoran of the Ashwood, the way she knew the names of storms, not because she had seen the storm personally, but because she had seen what storms left behind. 17 wolves who did not come home from the border 2 winters ago. She had known 3 of them. He was looking at her with those gold eyes, her cat's gold eyes, which were his gold eyes, which were the same eyes, and she had been sitting on a staircase, crying into those eyes for 3 weeks, and she said, "I know." He said, "I know." Then neither of them said anything for a while. She gave him a blanket. She told herself it was because the library was cold, which it was. It was December, and the East Library had old windows, and Calum kept meaning to have them replaced, and had not gotten to it yet. The cold was a real thing. The blanket was a practical response to a real thing. She sat in the chair on the opposite side of the room. She did not call for anyone. She did not reach for the communicator she kept in her robe pocket. She told herself she was waiting to hear what he said before she decided what to do, which was a reasonable thing to tell herself. "How long?" she said. "Since August," he said. His voice was rough from disuse, or from the wound, or from both. 7 months. 7 months as a cat. She thought about that in a way she could not entirely feel yet, because she was keeping the feeling at a distance, at arm's length, the way you hold things that are too hot to actually touch right now, but you are going to have to eventually. 7 months. He had been in the mud at the servants' gate in November, which meant he had been somewhere else for 4 months first, which meant he had found his way to the Citadel, to here specifically, deliberately. "Why?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. The way people are quiet when they are deciding how much of the truth is going to actually help anything. "The curse was Calum's witch's doing," he said. "Blood duel terms. I lost the duel. I accept that. The curse was part of the terms." He paused. "What the terms also said was that it would break if I survived the cycle. All of them, without being killed as an animal by a wolf of the northern pack." She looked at him. "You needed to survive living with the pack that beat you," she said. "I needed to survive living with the pack that beat me," he said. She thought about that, about the servants' gate, and the mud, and the rain, and those gold eyes that did not blink. "You could have been killed," she said. "I could have been killed. You were taking that risk. I was taking that risk. He met her eyes. I was not planning on staying. When I came, I thought I would find a place on the perimeter, stay outside enough to technically count as surviving within reach of the pack. What changed? She said. He looked at his hands. It was cold, he said finally, and she knew, in the way you know things you are not going to say out loud, that he was not talking about the weather. She should have told Caleb that morning. She knew she should have. She sat with the knowledge all the way through getting Zoran settled in the locked east study, the one that had a washroom and a window and could be bolted from the inside, and all the way through going back to her room and lying on her bed without sleeping and watching the ceiling while the moon finished its business outside, and dawn started the slow process of suggesting itself at the edges of the curtains. She should tell him. She was going to tell him. She would tell him when she knew what she was going to say, when she had decided what she felt about the 11 minutes on the staircase, and the blanket, and the gold eyes, and 17 wolves, and blood duel terms, and whether any of those things could exist in the same room as each other without the room coming apart. She needed a day. She gave herself a day. The day became 3 days. Not because she was hiding anything, not precisely. She was organizing. She was having conversations, one at a time, going back to the locked east study in the early mornings when the corridors were empty, and sitting across from a man who was not yet fully comfortable using his own voice and asking him questions. She asked about the border war, he told her, not defensively, which she had expected, not the way guilty people tell things, with the shape of a justification already built around every fact. He told her the way tired people tell things, flat and careful, like he had been carrying the weight of it for 2 years and had stopped caring about how it made him look, because the looking had long since stopped mattering. She learned things about an armistice offer that had been sent from Caleb's council to the Ashwood pack in the 3rd month of the conflict. An offer for terms. The messenger who had carried it, who had never arrived, who had been found 3 weeks later in a ditch 40 miles south, killed for the silver he had been carrying as proof of Caleb's good faith. She sat with that. You didn't know there was an offer, she said. I did not know there was an offer, he said. And without it I was told the Northern Pack was committing to full annexation, that there were no terms, that if I stood down without a treaty in place, my pack would be absorbed. He looked at the window. So I didn't stand down. She sat with that. You made choices, she said. After that. Things happened after that. Yes, he said. Not. But it wasn't my fault. Not. I had no choice. Just, yes. Things happened. I made choices. Both of those things are true. You can have one without the other undermining itself, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. She thought about 17 wolves. She thought about a messenger in a ditch. She thought about who had killed the messenger and whether Caleb knew, and whether Caleb not knowing was the same as Caleb not being responsible, and whether any of these things had clean answers. She did not think they did. She told herself she would tell Caleb that evening. Then one of his council members knocked on the east study door. She heard it from the corridor. She had just turned the corner from the west staircase, and she stopped because the knock was wrong, too specific, too certain of the location, too not a mistake, and her feet stopped before her brain told them to. She heard Caleb's voice on the other side of the corner, very quiet, with that quality of controlled that meant the control was working hard. You're certain, he said. She did not hear what the council member answered, just the footsteps, and then silence, and then Caleb's footsteps coming around the corner and stopping. He looked at her. She looked at him. The east study door was 10 feet away. Bolted. She had the key. Seraphine, he said. Not a question, not an accusation, just her name, said in a voice that was doing a lot of work to stay level. What she remembered, afterward, about the next 20 minutes, Caleb did not raise his voice. She had been braced for the raising of his voice because she had grown up in pack politics, and raising voices was what happened when something went wrong enough. It was the pressure valve. It was how people remained survivable when they were full of something that needed to go somewhere. Caleb's voice stayed exactly level, which was so much worse. He stood in the corridor, and she stood in the corridor, and she told him. Not all of it, not in order, but the parts that mattered. Ash, the moon, the East study, 3 days, the border armistice, the messenger, the ditch. She told him the way you tell things when you have waited too long, and now the telling has to do all the work at once. He listened. He was a good listener. She had noticed that about him early, the quality of his attention, how entirely he gave it. He listened like each word was going into a structure he was building in real time, and each new piece was being placed with care. When she stopped talking, he was quiet. 3 days, he said. 3 days, she said. You were going to tell me, he said. Still level. Impossible to read. I was going to tell you, she said. I needed to understand it first. He looked at the East study door for a moment. Then he looked at her. He had very dark eyes. She had noticed this before. The way his face in general was the kind of face that people made careful decisions around, not because it was unkind, but because it was so watchful, so comprehensive in its watching. Right now his face was doing something she had not seen it do before. She had expected anger. She had expected the thing that looked like coldness but was really anger wearing a suit. She had expected the face of a king who had just found out that his mate had been sheltering his enemy for 3 days in the heart of his citadel. What she got was a man sitting with the fact that he might have been wrong about something important and choosing, very deliberately, to sit with it instead of running from it. He sat down, right there in the corridor, on the window bench that nobody used because it was next to a draft. He sat down. She sat down beside him. Neither of them said anything for a while. She unlocked the East study. Calum went in first. She did not stop him and did not go ahead of him. This was his citadel, his territory, his call. Zoran stood when Calum walked in. Not the way you stand for a superior, the way you stand when you have decided you are going to face something on your feet, because whatever happens is going to happen to you standing up. They looked at each other. 2 alpha males who had fought a war, who had both lost things in the fighting, who were both, at this specific moment, standing in a locked East study at 6 in the morning in December with a woman who had named one of them Ash and given the other cups of tea from 12 inches too far away. Calum said, "The armistice letter." Zoran said, "I never received it." A pause. "I know," Calum said. Zoran looked at him. "I found out 4 months ago," Calum said. "The council member who arranged the messenger." A pause. "He is no longer on my council." Something moved through Zoran's expression. Not relief, more complicated than relief. The specific expression of someone who has been carrying a question that was destroying them and has just found out the answer, and the answer is terrible, and the answer is also the first solid ground they have stood on in 2 years. "And the Ashwood," Zoran said. "Is still standing," Calum said. "Your second, Alara. She has been managing in your absence. Competently." He paused. "I have not authorized any action against your pack in 8 months." Seraphine looked at Calum. She had not known that. He had not told her that. Not in 43 days of morning tea and corridor conversations, and Calum carefully not standing too close. He had been quietly holding off his own counsel for 8 months on behalf of a pack he had no political reason to protect, and he had not mentioned it. She thought, "I am going to have a very large number of feelings about this later." Zoran left the citadel 4 days before the spring thaw. He walked out. That is the important part. Not escorted, not at sword point, not in any of the ways that an enemy alpha might be expected to leave the citadel of the king who had beaten him in a blood duel. He picked up the pack he had been given. Practical things, travel things, the bag she had put together the morning before and left outside the study door, and he walked out the servants' gate. The same gate where she had found him in the mud in November. She was there. She had said goodbye to Calum first, and he had not asked to come with her to the gate, because he understood the shape of what this moment was, and did not need to insert himself into it. She gave Zoran a letter, sealed, Calum's mark on the wax, to the Ashwood elders, about the messenger, about what had been known and when, about what was being offered now, which was not enough. She knew it was not enough. Zoran knew it was not enough, but was the beginning of something that might, if everyone involved was stubborn enough, and patient enough, and willing to keep showing up for it, eventually become enough. Zoran held the letter. He did not look at her the way she had half expected him to look at her. Not with the weight of the staircase, or the 11 minutes, or any of the things that had happened in the dark of the East Library. He looked at her the way you look at someone who has done something that cost them something, and you are not going to pretend it didn't cost them. "The cat thing," he said. "Don't," she said. "The staircase." "I said don't." He almost smiled. It was not quite a smile. It was the expression that happened in the face right before a smile, right before the face decides it is too much. "Your mate," he said. "Yes," she said. He paused. "He's not wrong, in general." "I know," she said. "That must be irritating." "Profoundly," she said. He tucked the letter into his pack. He looked at the gate. He looked back at her once. "The curse," he said. "It is. Thank you. For not." He stopped. "Tried again. For the 11 minutes." She looked at the gate. "Go home," she said. He went. The East Library felt different after that. She was not sure it had actually changed. The books were still in the same places. The window seat still had the same draft. The fire still needed the same 15 minutes to fully catch, but the feeling of it was different. Like a room that has had an extra person in it for long enough that even after they leave, the air still remembers the shape of them. She put a blanket on the window seat. Not for warmth. She told herself it was for warmth. She had always found the east window seat drafty, and a blanket was a practical solution. She sat in the chair by the fire every evening after that, and she looked at the window seat, and she felt something she was not going to name out loud. She let it sit there. She did not put words to it. She did not explain it to herself, or resolve it, or wrap it up neatly. The feeling was there. The blanket was there. That was enough. Calum started standing closer. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Not in a way he announced or that they discussed. Because they were both, at their cores, people who preferred to demonstrate things rather than declare them. It started with 7 inches. He stood 7 inches away one morning instead of 12, handing her the tea, and her whole peripheral awareness went sideways for a moment in a way she had gotten very practiced at hiding. Then 6 inches. Then 5. She was keeping track. She was keeping track, and she was not going to tell him she was keeping track, and she was fairly confident, looking at the particular quality of attention he gave to the space between them, that he knew she was keeping track, and was also not going to say anything about it. This was, she thought, the specific and infuriating and actually somewhat miraculous thing about Calum. The way he understood that patience was not waiting for something to happen, but actually doing something, consistently, quietly, without fanfare. That closing an inch of distance every morning was an action, was a statement, was him saying, "I am here, I will not rush you, I will keep showing up at this particular distance until the distance is the right distance." Which was, of course, the thing about him that made her stay. Not the mate bond. She had been willing to fight the mate bond. She had a whole list of reasons to fight the mate bond. She had made the list in the first week. She was a thorough person. The list had been quietly losing members for 43 days. She thought about the 8 months. The Ashwood pack, standing, because Calum had quietly held off his own counsel for 8 months, and not mentioned it to anyone, not used it, not tucked it into a conversation as evidence of his goodness. He had just done it, and kept going. She thought about a man sitting down on a window bench in a corridor, because the alternative was to react from a place that was less than honest, and he was trying to be honest. She thought, I am going to be very bad at being easy about this. She thought, he probably already knows that. She thought, he is probably fine with that. There were 12 days of conversation. She called them conversations. They were also sitting across from each other in the East Library, arguing about the Ashwood terms. Calum walking her through the border archive she had not been given access to before. Not because she had not been allowed, but because she had not asked, and he had not assumed. Her finding 3 significant errors in the Council's territorial mapping, and pointing them out without softening, and watching him receive this with something that looked like respect. Him telling her, 3 nights in, looking at the fire, not at her, about the council member and the messenger and the 4 months of knowing before he had been able to do anything with the knowing. Her sitting with that and feeling the weight of it without trying to take the weight from him. One morning she sat down with her tea, and he sat down close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, and neither of them said anything about it, and the tea got cold. She went back to the blanket on the window seat. Some mornings she sat in the East Library alone before the Citadel fully woke up, in the specific quality of early morning quiet that belongs only to libraries and the people who understand what libraries are for, and she looked at the window seat, at the blanket, at the space beside it where Ash used to sit in the winter light, that particular gold quality of morning light on a charcoal gray coat, those gold eyes that watched with too much comprehension for what they were supposed to be. She felt the thing she was not naming. She let it sit there. She put her hand on the edge of the blanket once, just the edge, just for a moment, and then pulled it back and picked up her book instead. Some things did not need to be named to be real. Some things were more real for not being named. The library held them all. The grief and the blanket and the unfinished armistice letter and the 11 minutes and the 7 inches shrinking to 6, shrinking to 5, held them the way a library holds everything, without judgment, without ordering you to feel one thing at a time. She exhaled. Outside, the thaw was starting. The ice on the north courtyard cracking and shifting, the sound of it carrying faintly through the old windows, a slow unlocking. She opened her book. The fire caught. The blanket sat on the window seat. And downstairs, somewhere in the direction of the kitchen, she heard the sound of Calum's voice, low, even, talking to one of the morning soldiers about something entirely practical, and she felt, for the first time in 43 days plus however many more it was now, like she was not holding herself 12 inches away from her own life. Just an inch, maybe less. She turned the page.